Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we take a moment to honor the American and international legends we have recently lost, along with other beloved figures whose journeys left a profound impression on the world. If this touches something in you, please consider hitting the like button. Your support helps us continue celebrating these lives with the respect and care they genuinely deserve. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's take this time to remember them together. Some names never dominate the headlines, yet somehow they never quite leave you either. William Finn was exactly that kind of name. He passed away at 73. For those who truly followed his work, the loss feels like the fading of a gentle voice that always found the right words. The announcement came softly, without fanfare, which in many ways felt entirely appropriate for who he was. If you were part of the theater world in the late 80s and early 90s, you know what it felt like when falsettos appeared in 1992. It wasn't reaching for applause. It was simply telling the truth. Complicated families, love that refused to fit neatly into boxes, laughter and sorrow sharing the same breath, and somehow it all held together beautifully. It endured. It even brought him Tony Awards, though recognition never really seemed to be what drove him. After that came a new brain, something smaller and far more intimate. There was lived experience woven through every note of it, something deeply personal. And then the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee arrived, deceptively breezy on the surface until it revealed its deeper layers. That was his gift. He drew you in without effort, then left you carrying something long after the curtain fell. Those who had the privilege of working alongside him described him consistently the same way. Thoughtful, careful with his craft, perhaps a little reserved in person. But through music, everything inside him opened wide. That's what lingers most now. Time continues forward. Stages evolve. Fresh voices emerge. But now and then you catch a phrase, a melody, a fleeting musical moment that doesn't feel like it belongs to the present. It feels like something passed down with intention. Perhaps that is his truest legacy. Not productions alone, but something living that continues speaking long after silence fills the room. Some people's lives refuse to move in a single straight line. Margot Hartman was one of those people. Quietly complex, she traveled between worlds that seldom intersect. She passed at 86, and the news arrived with a kind of calm dignity. No drama surrounding it, just quiet recognition. There was a period when her face on screen felt familiar in the best possible way. Not flashy, never demanding attention, but present and grounded, the kind of person you remembered without needing a reminder. Mid-century New York had a particular energy to it, a certain drive balanced with discipline, and she seemed to carry that spirit wherever she went. Then something changed, or perhaps it simply grew. While others stayed confined to one path, she stepped boldly onto another. She moved into business leadership, eventually rising to the position of chairman at a prominent real estate firm in Connecticut. That achievement alone speaks volumes, particularly for a woman carving out that level of authority during an era when such doors were rarely left open. People who encountered her along the way frequently mentioned her composure. Not cold, never unapproachable, but measured and deliberate, as though she had an innate sense of when words were needed and when silence served better. That kind of wisdom isn't learned quickly. Looking at her life as a whole, it's a fascinating thing. The arts on one side, the discipline of commerce on the other. Imagination meeting strategy. And she carried both with ease, never feeling the need to justify the combination. What remains isn't just a list of her accomplishments. It's the overall shape of how she moved through the world. The way a person can pass through entirely different chapters of life without ever losing the thread of who they are. Some people are always quietly building something, whether anyone notices or not. Here are names that transcend the individual and become symbols of something much larger. Afrika Bambaataa was one of those names. He passed at 68, and for countless people it felt as though one of the original heartbeats of hip-hop had gone still. The response that followed was more reflective than loud, which feels fitting for someone whose real work was never about personal fame but about laying groundwork for generations to come. If you have any memory of the Bronx in the late 1970s, you remember the atmosphere. Open-air block parties, turntables carried into parks, music that was raw and unpolished and absolutely electric with life. Right at the center of that electricity was Bombat, not merely spinning records but fundamentally reimagining what records could do. When Planet Rock arrived in the early 80s, it hit like nothing that had come before it. Electronic, forward-looking, almost otherworldly, it pointed toward a future while the rest of the music world was still catching up. But the sound was never the whole story, and that's the piece that gets overlooked. The Zulu nation represented something deeper. It was a conscious effort to redirect hardship into creativity, to offer young people a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with violence. That mattered enormously then. It still does today. Those who knew him or moved within that world often spoke of a man who carried himself with clear purpose and focus. The spotlight held no special appeal for him. He was occupied with something more lasting underneath it. Looking back now, the full picture is layered. As with many figures inseparable from movements, his story carries more than one dimension. But what remains undeniable is the space he helped create. Music continues to evolve, new artists continue to rise, but trace almost anything back far enough and you find yourself standing in territory he helped open up. He was a quiet child. That part tends to surprise people. Born Reginald Kenneth Dwight on March 25, 1947 in Pinner, England, he came up in a household where silence communicated more than conversation. His father, a disciplined RAF officer, never quite understood his son's pull toward music. He saw it as an indulgence at best. But the piano was different. Young Reg would plant himself there for long stretches, listening, absorbing, sensing something he lacked the words to describe. At 11, he won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music. That should have felt purely triumphant, and it was, but it also carried the full weight of expectation with it. He wasn't the commanding performer the world would come to know. He was uncertain, introverted, quietly wondering whether the person he sensed himself becoming was actually reachable. So he constructed someone who could reach it. Not quite Elton John yet, but moving steadily in that direction. The transformation didn't happen in a single moment. A name alone doesn't rebuild a person unless that person desperately needs rebuilding. By the late 1960s, Reginald had become Elton John. A different name, a different face to present to the world, one that could walk to the edge of a stage without hesitation, one that didn't carry all of the old weight in quite the same way. Then 1970 arrived. Your song came out, understated and completely honest, and people stopped and listened in a way they hadn't before. Through the 70s, records like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road in 1973 made him not just popular but inescapable. The outfits, the oversized glasses, the sheer relentless energy of it all. But underneath the spectacle, fractures were forming quietly. He pushed himself without limit, performed without rest, and somewhere inside the noise of constant acclaim, he began losing himself again. Success has a particular talent for concealing damage, especially when the world is invested in your smile. By the end of the 70s and deep into the 80s, the struggle became harder to contain. Substance dependency, physical exhaustion, a loneliness that seemed impossible to explain to anyone observing from the outside. In 1984 he married Renata Bluell, and for a moment it appeared that steadiness had arrived. It hadn't. They separated in 1988. He was still searching, for peace, for clarity, for something resembling acceptance of himself. In 1990, he stopped. He entered rehab, and that decision carried no glamour with it whatsoever. No audience, no applause, just a man acknowledging that the road he was on had reached its end. For the first time in years, he turned toward himself honestly. Not the persona. The actual person beneath it. Recovery didn't create a new version of Elton John. It returned him to something true. The 1990s carried a noticeably different quality. More stillness, more intention behind each step. In 1992 he launched the Elton John AIDS Foundation, and that wasn't simply philanthropy. It was personal grief transformed into sustained action. He had lost people he loved, more than he should have had to. Then 1997 arrived, and with it the death of Princess Diana. Candle in the Wind became something far beyond a recorded song. It became a vessel for collective mourning, millions of people holding their grief together through music. His personal life was quietly reshaping itself as well. In 2005 he entered a civil partnership with David Furnish. In 2014, when the law fully allowed it, they married. He was building a family, the kind of stable and loving home he had never experienced growing up. He built it imperfectly, but genuinely, and the difference that made in him was visible. The slowing down didn't come all at once. It crept in through small deliberate choices that gradually accumulated into something different. When the Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour was announced in 2018, it didn't register as the kind of goodbye people typically imagine. It felt like a man finally deciding where his energy truly belonged. Not perpetual motion. Not the industry's demands. Home. Because home had become something it never was before. Fatherhood, which came to him with Zachary in 2010 and Elijah in 2013, rearranged his priorities in ways no professional achievement had ever managed. He has spoken about it openly. Nothing else compares. For the first time in his life, a stage was no longer the center of his world. There were still difficult moments ahead. A serious fall in 2021 resulted in hip surgery and forced a significant pause. But he didn't retreat. He regrouped. And when he returned to the piano, something in the playing had shifted. Not diminished. Quieter, more rooted. The need to prove anything had simply dissolved. The man who once armored himself in spectacle now inhabits his own skin with far more ease. The glasses are still there, the presence remains unmistakable, but what once felt like performance now feels like honesty. For those who followed him from the beginning, through the chaos and the brilliance and the long uncertain middle, this version of Elton feels most complete. Not finished. Just finally, genuinely himself.